I mean, I can't say enough how important what you're doing, but it's how you get it over. You just want to be like everybody's moaning about things. It's got to be constructive, and I think you're being constructive, and that's what I liked about your presentation today. I mean, I wasn't quite sure at the start whether you were talking in history or talking about now. I realise now it's a mixture of both.
Hear, hear. A day that will stand out in my life among the great events in the campaign for women's enfranchisement. The women's movement is an international one. Women of every land are today crying out for justice, which is liberty and equality. I am Annie Kenny, a working class mill girl from Oldham in the north of England. I was one of the leading members of the suffragette movement and of the Women's Social and Political Union. I grew up in the midst of women and girls in the works, and I saw the hard life of these women and children about me. And I noticed the great difference in the treatment of men and women in the factory, difference in conditions, difference in wages, difference in status. But I noticed this difference not in the factory alone, but in the home. I saw men and women, boys and girls, all working hard during the day in the same hot, stifling factories. Then when work was over, I noticed it was the mothers who hurried home, who fetched the children who'd been put out to nurse, prepared the tea for the husband, did the cleaning, the baking, the washing, the sewing, the nursing. I noticed that when the husband came home, his day's work was over. He took his tea, then went out to join his friends in the club or public house, or on the cricket or football field. And I used to ask myself, why was this so? Why was the mother the drudge of the family, not the father's companion and equal? It is wonderful today to see so much progress made, the roles of mother and father becoming more equal. But women, I hear, are still treated unequally in many instances.
They are fighting for the invisible voices to be heard. Their battle cry is StrongHer Together. Annie, we are still struggling and fighting for equality. Why, as a career-focused young woman ready to enter the world of work, should I face discrimination because of my gender, when my capabilities and skills are equal to those of my male counterparts? With only a quarter of the UK Parliament women and 26% of FTSE 100 board companies run by women, it is transparent that women's employment opportunities are still largely restricted by their gender. And in 2019, the big companies and institutions around the world are being run by powerful, white, privileged men. Women in leadership roles are seen as unnatural, bossy, unattractive, scary, and even unfeminine. How can we expect the next generation of young women to seek and gain positions of authority when we're labelling them in this way? With so few worldwide female leaders currently in power, we can see our attitudes towards women in positions of authority needs to change.
But we've got 2 female prime ministers in the past. Like, isn't that enough? What more do we want?
Yeah, okay, I hear you. Whilst having 2 female prime ministers is an important step towards progress, what this means for working class, ordinary women living in northern England, someone like myself, is not revolutionary. We can't let this take away from the fact that in 2019, the majority of ordinary working women living in Britain are still facing discrimination. We can't use it as a mask to hide the sexism that still exists in our society. It's clear that despite coming so far, gender equality in employment is far from being achieved. The pay gap. The pay gap is something that many refuse to believe still exists in the modern age. However, it remains at 20% on average globally, with some sectors, such as finance, reaching nearly 40%. I'd just like to take a minute in the room if you want to maybe note down on the post-it note what you think this pay gap would do to your current employment. So a man that we had earlier told us that £5,000 would be taken from his salary if the gender pay gap of 20% was put onto his annual pay. So yeah, it's just something to think about. Yeah, if £5,000 was taken off your salary, do you really think in 2019 this is fair and equal? If women do rise above such discrimination and they gain their dream job, then 54,000 women last year, this is 11% of the female population, reported pregnancy discrimination, which forced them to leave their jobs. The pay gap jumped from 7 to 21% when women have children, showing that pregnancy discrimination is no myth. Pregnancy discrimination can put women off challenging themselves to reach higher employment positions, or it can put them off starting a family altogether. I included in the latter category, often thinking that to achieve my career goals I would have to sacrifice having children. Women like myself shouldn't need to choose between their careers and having a family. Okay, so a bit of a question here. How much do you think studies show that gender productivity and employment opportunities could be worth if these facilities were made equal?
What, like in amount of money?
Yeah, in amount of money. How much do you think if all employment, so the gender pay gap got rid of and all employment opportunities were equal for men and women?
Would it be in the millions?
A little bit higher?
Billions?
So it would be worth 600 billion to the economy. So just let that sink in for a minute. If you think about all the pledges that the different political parties are making in this election, imagine what £6 billion could do. So what are we waiting for? We're calling for change. We're calling for action. Every employer can make a difference to ensure that, like myself, career-focused young women ready to enter the work don't face discrimination because of their gender. What are you going to do to help achieve this for the next generation of young women who have so much potential to offer? Enough is enough.
Oh, Annie Kenny, what would you say if I told you women don't have equal gender pay, but just like you, we will not give in until the changes start to begin?
We are here in this historical place, founded during the Enlightenment by William Shipley over 100 years before my birth. The Society adopted progressive policies towards women and was indeed the first such institution in Britain to include women among its members. Hear, hear. It was noted that ladies as well as gentlemen are invited into this subscription, as there is no reason to imagine they will be behindhand in a generous and sincere regard for the good of their country. Patrons of the Society included the Queen of Bluestocking, Elizabeth Montagu, Countess of Denbigh, the Duchess of Northumberland and Anne Birch-Cockings, the housekeeper and registrar of the Society, who I'm led to believe was a bit of a character and wielded a great deal of influence that went well beyond her job description. But I hear women's representation in politics is poor. Would the RSA, with such a great history, consider a sistership led by women like Libby here, who are so passionate that we consider gender?
Annie, I have a great passion for politics, inspired by women like you who fought for women like me. But yet there are still barriers that I face. As a young woman active in politics, I can tell you from first-hand experience there is very little representation for people like me. Imagine walking into a room expecting a diverse group of activists only to be greeted by a sea of men in suits and you are the only young woman in the room. This is a regular occurrence. This number was just 32% and only 4% of these women were BAME women.
Only 4% black, Asian, minority, ethnic.
Yeah, nowhere near equal representation. Not even enough to fill a whole sitting of the House. Does anyone know how long ago the first female MP took their seat in Parliament?
50 years?
Longer than that.
70 years.
70, nearly. It was 100 years. 100 years last week, and yet we are still nowhere close to achieving equal representation, but many people do not see this as a problem. Policies that increase women's representation, such as all women shortlists, have had limited implementation. They're only used by the Labour Party and Liberal Democrat, and the Conservative Party refuse to use them. Only 20% of their MPs are currently women, and as the largest party, this significantly impacts the total amount of female MPs. A common argument against 50-50 representation in Parliament is that it removes an element of meritocracy and people are just given positions simply because they're women and they're actually not qualified for the position. However, I totally refute this. For one, I know many women are qualified for this, and they are not rare to find. And I can definitely think of many men who may be underqualified for these positions, yet they are not questioned. The photo here is of leaders in Greater Manchester, and they are all white men. I do not feel represented by this. Unequal representation in politics is not just limited to Parliament. Just 35% of local councils are women and only 3 elected mayors. Does anyone want to have a guess at how, if this current rate continues, how long it will take to become equal?
So how long do you think it will take for us to get 50-50 representation people on like whatever level?
Like councils?
Yeah, councils and stuff. How many years do you think it's going to take? Because it's like 100 years.
No, well,
Not quite 100 years.
sounds less bad now. It's only 32 years, but in 32 years, I will be 51. That is most of my working life. This is not good enough. It's hard for me to see a future career path in politics when there seems to be so few opportunities for people like me. So this is why we are calling for change. I urge you to take necessary steps to create equal gender representation across all platforms, support all women shortlists, and support young women like us.
I looked at a college photo because I wanted to see how many women were doing politics, just like me. The truth is, we are few and far between. Why is that? What does it mean?
December 2019. We have found ourselves more divided than any other time in history. 10 years of austerity and the domination of the Brexit syndrome has left many women, young women and girls in the north living in conditions that I hope we would never need to revisit. People with no homes, no food, no healthcare, living in extreme poverty. And the increase in violence against women. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic abuse in her lifetime. That is 1.3 million women last year alone under the age of 60. Last year, due to domestic violence, 173 people were killed, the highest number for 5 years. 32% of homeless women are saying domestic violence is the cause, but the conditions of the accommodation, I hear.
Annie, these aren't just facts and figures that you're saying. This is the story of women everywhere. In your time, Annie, we had great women who were the pioneers of creating safe spaces for women. In my own hometown of Oldham, your friend Mary was the first to create a women's refuge. That actually brings me on to what today's theme is about, life on the outside. It's near and dear to me because for the past 2 years, I was living life on the outside. I wasn't the first thing you think of when it comes to domestic violence. I wasn't the first thing I thought of when it comes to that. What I experienced was HBV, honour-based violence. It's got many religious, cultural and emotional dimensions to it. Greater Manchester last year had reported 78 cases of honour-based violence, 28 reported cases of forced marriage, and no official reports of female genital mutilation. On the surface that seems stellar, but last year the Home Office reported a 47% increase in the number of cases like that. And that's only for the things that are reported. Imagine how many undergo without having anyone say anything. April 2018. It was 6 weeks after my 18th birthday. What can you do when you're 18?
Party!
You can party, you can drink. What else can you do? You can vote, you can do all the exciting things of being an adult. You forget you're actually a dependent child. So 6 weeks after my 18th birthday, I had to leave home. Some call it fleeing, I describe it as an unfortunate set of circumstances. I had nowhere to go, so I spent 5 hours in the police station that night. Answering the interrogative questions from the police officers, it had me wondering, do they even know this is abuse? Are they going to send me home? I had to ask a stranger that night who was assigned to me as a case for a hug because I didn't know how I was going to survive the night. That night I got put into emergency accommodation.
What was that like?
What was it like? It was the finest stay that they had to offer. A barely furnished room, corridors full of marijuana smoke, a bed that was the barest it could be, and a lovely little roommate that I don't remember asking for, a rat.
kept me up, couldn't go to sleep. So after that night in that emergency accommodation, I got put into a women's refuge. Single room, one bed, shared kitchen, shared bathroom. How much do you think it costs for someone to live there for a week? Like, regardless of who pays for it, how much do you think the cost is?
£170.
More than £170 per week.
250.
More than £250 per week. More than £300. It was,
310?
huh?
310?
Much more. It was £380 per week to live in a women's refuge. Housing benefits only cover £360. You're expected to make up that £25 every week. Living in a refuge, if you have a full-time job, if you have any job, you're liable to pay the full rent. So if you're like me and you were on universal credit on the minimum amount because you didn't feel like you could contest it, £251.77, it's no wonder it only takes a short amount of time to get into debt. For me, it was 4 months to get into £600 of debt. Information here. You can see the police recommend going to them for help, going into a station or calling 101. How does it feel to see this help being offered but not being able to access it? A lot of young women like me couldn't leave home alone without being followed, couldn't make a phone call without the fear that your bills were going to be tracked and analysed. And a police officer that can help, that's not a guarantee. I had 2 officers come to me after I had to report some harassment. They came back to tell me that my abusers thought I was being emotionally controlled and manipulated by my partner. It was humiliating having to explain that I knew what abuse was and that I had the willpower to remove myself from it. I'm one of the lucky ones. There was a woman, single mother to 2 children. After about a year in a women's refuge, she got £6,000 into debt. She'd never been in debt before. It's not on. So I was lucky enough that I did manage to move out, but I was there for much longer than the time you're told you'll be there. Usually it's 6 to 8 months. I was there for a year and 7, almost double the time. And it's no easy feat getting out of debt on your own. It's no easy feat trying to move on with your life. It means a lot more needs to be done. So my call for action today is for people to invest into funding for women-specific services so that they're provided with services that not only help them to survive, but help them to thrive and help them to move on with their lives. I mean, it's young women and girls who are leading the fight for equality. It's young women and girls who are asking the hard questions and leading the marches. And do you know who's getting exhausted of being the ones fighting for equality? Young women and girls.
I was only 14. What did I know? Who to turn to? Where to go? The system had failed me. Police questioned me constantly. Where could girls just like me go? The invisible faces of society.
What drove me in 1907 to want change still rings true today. Do you wonder that my heart was full of revolt as a child against this state of things? I saw the mothers of Lancashire working in the factories a few days before the baby was born. I saw these women whose lives were a tale of suffering and sacrifice, working all the time while they were bearing and rearing a large family. And then, after a life of hard work and bringing life after life into the world, I have seen them sink into their grave worn out and broken-spirited. I am myself the child of a working woman, and I saw these things happen in my own mother's life. It was natural that I should ponder over all these things, and that I should begin to ask myself, how can I help the women of Great Britain to obtain a greater measure of happiness and freedom in their life?
Happiness, Annie, is something that girls like me struggle with.
with suicide rates nearly enough doubling in young women in the past decade. My journey started out when I was younger. I was 11 years old, so I didn't really have a care in the world. I'd be lying to say it was a terrible experience. I was excited to get my first social media account, to talk with friends and family, and then it became a terrible experience again. That led me, at 11 years old, to attempt to take my life. You could say this has led me here today. I don't want any young women to ever feel that they are alone.
You're not alone.
Mental health services are in crisis and do not currently offer a gender or trauma-informed approach. In some areas, there is up to a 2-year wait with little or no investment in prevention. My own experiences was shocking. You probably might be asking, why is it shocking? Well, I had, I'd say, about 1 therapy session out of all of it, and I had cancellation after cancellation with empty promises to call my school. And I'm 17 now, so I was 11, so 6 years, and I still haven't found help about it. So young women like me don't have a voice. We get what we get. What if you don't have a family to support? What if you have no one to speak to? Your life is just on hold. It's like a waiting game. So my story is mainly about online bullying. But for most people, and for me, it continues in spaces in schools and town. So you don't really get away from it. Childline has seen 87% increase in calls concerning cyberbullying in the last 3 years. For me, the first time I was able to speak openly about my story was with these women. And being a part of a group that is kind has really helped me. We have to find a way to be more kind in this country. This is why I love the #kindness campaign with Little Mix and Simple. Because it is so important that young women speak out about what's affecting them. So my calls to action. We need to enable young women like me to have a voice in shaping services that doesn't just mean ticking a box. We need to invest in services that focus on gender and trauma, especially within women's services. And we also need to invest in services so young women get what they need when they need it.
Social media would work if it was done with respect, but if it's malicious, it can have a detrimental effect. That's in fashion an ideal ideology. I hate the passionately.
It was 1909. Winston Churchill, my old Labour MP from Oldham, was the speaker at a great Liberal fete in Dorsetshire. 4 suffragettes, a huge crowd. No sooner my back was turned, men started dragging me about. One pulled a knife from his pocket and started cutting my coat, cut to shreds from the neck downwards. They lifted up my coat and cut my frock, and one lifted up my frock and cut my petticoat. "Undress her," they cried. They pulled down my hair, but I turned on them and said, "This will be your shame, not mine."